a very, very fortunate baby because my parents, Winfield and Mary Dockeray, adopted me when I was 3 months old. And they were old enough to be my grandparents at that time. Well, always. And they had just built a new home on Collindale. And they got caught up in the Great Depression. And when I was 5 years old, my father had a massive heart attack. And so he couldn't go back to his regular bookkeeping job at an automobile agency in Grand Rapids. And he always wanted to be a farmer, and so he decided to be a chicken farmer. One time I remember we had 5,000, and I didn't even know what 5,000 was, but it was a lot of chickens. And so I was the only child, and it was fun. It was fun. It was hard. I learned to be a farmer. I had an aunt that was a school teacher in Grand Rapids, and we were walking on Collindale one day, and I saw a little white stone down on the gravel. And I don't know, it caught my eye. Well, you know, when you're only about so tall, why, you see things on the ground a lot easier. And I picked it up and I handed it to her. And I said, "What's this?" I don't know how many thousands of times I've had kids do that to me. I don't know what I expected. And she looked at it and she said, "Oh, that's a piece of quartz." And I said, "You mean it really does have a name?" "Oh, yeah." I said, "Do these other stones down here have names?" "Oh, yeah, they all have names." I said, "Oh, wow. What do you call people who like stones?" And she said, "Geologists." I said, "Wow, I'm going to be one." I had two friends that lived up the road just a little bit, and when we'd get all our chores done and we had a little free time, we'd get on our bikes and we'd ride across Leonard Street and we'd go to Collins Woods. We'd play in the creek, get all dirty, and get burrs all over us and have a wonderful time. Just, I don't know what all we did. I know there's one place where there's kind of a dished out place. And I remember when we wanted to cross the creek and not get our feet wet, we had this big tree that had fallen across the creek. So we would sit on our fannies and we'd slide down the hill till we got to the tree, and then we'd walk across that and go on our way. And that little dished out place where our fannies went many, many years ago is still there. Never, never forget that what you do today to the earth or around the earth, it may be there for a long, long, long time. And I had a teacher in 5th grade, Anna Nelson. And Anna Nelson was a biology teacher. She taught us in 5th grade, 10th grade biology, I am sure. I look back on that and think, wow, we learned all sorts of stuff. And it was just the norm as far as we were concerned. People were kind of scared of her because she was tough, very tough. And so when she heard that I was going to be a geologist, she never let up on me.
Mary Jane graduated from Michigan State University in 1949, and she graduated as a geologist. There were not very many women in geology in 1949. It was considered to be much more of a man's job. In many mines, women were not allowed underground. And so she was creating inroads and creating kind of a role model for women.
When I went to Michigan State in 45, there were about 5,000 people. They hadn't had to deal with very many women in the geology department, and so this was kind of new. And so there ended up being 4 women in the geology department. When I was about to finish my sophomore year, the geology department professors said, we need to start up again with a month-long field experience for all geology majors. Can't get a degree unless you have that 1 month. It's in the Upper Peninsula. What are we going to do with these 4 women? Posed a big problem. We will have to find a chaperone. Woo. Well, in 2016, that sounds rather odd. But back then, it was a very serious thing. So one of the girls' mother just said she'd go with us. And we traveled for the first 2 weeks all over the Upper Peninsula, looking at so many rocks that I'd never ever seen before. There was an island. There was a nice point of land, and then there was this little island about 700 feet beyond. And so our geology professor, Dr. Sandifer, Sandy, we all called him Sandy, and he said, we're going over there, and if you don't want to get your clothes wet, take them off. So we did. Away we went. The clothes on top of our heads over to this island. Well, it was quite an experience because the last 2 weeks we settled down in the Dead Stream Swamp near Ishpeming, and we rowed our boats for about a half an hour to an area where we mapped. There were 2 guys and a gal on most of the cruise, and we spent that last 2 weeks drawing maps and knocking on rocks and trying to determine what they were and where they fitted into the picture of geology of the Upper Peninsula. So that was a big experience because I'd never been on such a trip like that. I'm a geologist at heart. When I got back from field camp, I had a month before my junior year was going to start. And I needed money. So I began tramping the streets of Grand Rapids looking for somebody to hire me for a month. Didn't work. So one day my mother said to me, you know, your dad knew Frank Dumont very well. And she said, why don't you go to the museum and see if they have any kind of a program that you might fit in as a volunteer. So I went down there and talked with him, and he said, yes, we have a summer program going for kids. And he said, you're a geologist, or you're going to be, and so we don't have anybody that knows anything about geology, so why don't you have a little group geology club? Well, I said, oh, that sounds interesting. I didn't know anything about working with little kids, but I thought, oh, well, the geology part will be fun. And so when I went back to school, Mr. Dumont said to me, how would you like to come back and do this and get paid for it next summer, all summer? Whoa, that'd be wonderful. And so I did. And then at the end of that summer, he called me in and he said, you know, about 15 years ago, we had a staff position called Nature Lecturer. And he said, I did that when I first came to the museum. That was my job. If I can manage to get that back on the budget, would you like to do that? So as soon as I got out of college, on the 1st of July in '49, I went to work for the Public Museum as nature lecturer, later on curator of natural science. All kinds of things changed over the years. And my first school was Sheldon School. Wow, I was scared pink. Will they sit there and listen? They did. That was wonderful.
She started going to all different classrooms in Grand Rapids, talking about the environment and nature. Now, first of all, she's about 50 years ahead of her time on that piece, and to do it as a female. So it wasn't necessarily horribly unusual to have a female in a classroom, but it was really unusual to have a female lead and create an environmental center and go out and get land. And I mean, it was unheard of. So now we take a lot of things for granted, but boy, I tell you, 30, 40, 50 years ago, she was really a very unusual person, and that took a lot of courage and vision. And I'm telling you, I'm sure there are a lot of people that kind of looked at her wondering, you know, what planet she was from.
And once in a while, a teacher would say, I'd like to take the kids outdoors. Well, that just wasn't done. And do you know a place that would be good to get the kids out where there was a pond, where there was a creek, where there was a woods, where there were fields? I said, yeah, I know just a place. I said, I played there when I was a kid. I called it Collins Woods, Then one day I went out there to photograph flowers in the spring. And here were these stakes, these kind of triangular stakes that surveyors use. And they were all down along the creek. I thought, uh-oh, that didn't look very good. I wonder what's going to happen to my woods. And so when I went back to the museum, I called the assessor's office and I explained where this property was that I trespassed on. And a lot of kids did too. And they came back and said, oh, Victor Blandford owns a big parcel of that. I said, oh, really? Well, I'd heard the Blandford name. They were prominent in Grand Rapids, the whole family, for many years. And then I did what I still can't believe I did. I called them up. And I said to Mr. Blandford, I just wanted to explain that I've been trespassing on one of your pieces of property with a lot of kids. And he said, oh, that's great. I thought, okay, I guess I can go on with this. And so I ran down to Dewey's office and I said, guess what I just did? He didn't care what I did, because it was always move forward, move forward. And so Dewey said, do you think we ought to go out and talk to the Blandfords? I couldn't believe he said that. I said, well, can we do that? And he said, sure, I'll call him up and we'll just go out and tell him what a nature center is. They didn't know what a nature center was. Nobody hardly knew what a nature center was back in the mid-1960s. But they decided it was a good enough thing that they would give the city of Grand Rapids 10 acres in the ravines right there with a creek to be administered through the public museum but owned by the city of Grand Rapids.
Here was a woman in the mid-70s that was charting new waters, that the environmental movement was just beginning, and there were some other women along with her that really spearheaded it.
Leading an effort to preserve a piece of property, getting community leaders and philanthropists to take her seriously as a woman, and come together to make this actually happen. That is rare and that is wonderful.
And I said, but I have a letter from the state fire marshal saying I can do this. Oh, what are you going to do? Dewey had retired, and W.D. Frankfurter had come in as director, and he was all go, go, go. He was just as inventive and ahead of his time as Dewey had been. And so I got to talking to him one day. I said, you know what? I had a group of third graders from Stocking School out at the Nature Center today, and a little girl fell in the creek. And I said, she got sopping wet, and I had no way of drying her off or taking her in it. There wasn't anything. And, we had a lot of bushes, and so that was our restroom if we really got stuck. So I said to Frankfurter, you know what? Can I at least have potties out here? And he said, why don't you dream a little? The Museum Association members are looking for a meaty project. Maybe they could help raise some money, and we could get some money to build you a little bit bigger building out here. And so he said, what would you like? If you could dream a little, what would you like out here? So we sat out on the land, literally on the land, drawing a sketch. When I'd say, well, it needs to have a welcoming lobby. It needs to have restrooms, of course. It needs to have a laboratory where we can go out and get things and bring in and study them under the microscope and so on. And then we ought to have just a nice little gathering room. So one of the men at the museum, an artist, drew us a picture that we could take around to different groups and say, would you be interested in helping with this? And we finally got enough money together to get architects to make real honest-to-goodness plans. And it was Frank and Stein from Lansing. Believe it or not, that was the name of the architect group. When we broke ground, we had only 10 acres. And I said, I don't want to cover up any more of this 10 acres with a building than absolutely necessary. So I guess we have to have an upstairs. Once we opened in the fall of 1968, then it was formal. We could put out newsletters to the teachers in all the schools in Grand Rapids area. Come to Blandford Nature Center. We have these programs to offer and come and find out what a nature center is all about. We had volunteers come. We had a marvelous group of volunteers.
My husband traveled around Michigan quite a bit and saw maple syrup operations, buckets hanging on trees and sugar houses, and he thought that would be a neat idea for Blandford to have a sugar operation as a demonstration. And so he suggested it to me. I was very cautious in approaching the idea with Mary Jane because I thought she might not like having holes in the trees. So when I broached the subject, oh yeah, she just thought that'd be great, you know, Mary Jane and her enthusiasm. And so have a demonstration sugar bush we did.
I didn't plan a lot of this, but when things opened up, we jumped in. Sometimes those doors aren't open very wide, and you can't think twice. You've got to think once and hope it's the right thing. We always liked the gathering at the end of the day to talk over the day and how did it go and what we could do differently or what we could do more or whatever.
We kept thinking about, well, how can we have a greater depth of involvement with these students? How could we have them here for a longer period of time? And Mary Jane really wanted to have that kind of extended exposure with the students. And that was the beginning of Blandford School. And so the first year of Blandford School was 1973. And actually, I was kind of working with finishing my degree and doing a semester of teaching with Grand Rapids Public Schools. And then in 74, Mary Jane hired me to come to the farm. And that's when we decided that we really wanted to have the involvement with the Blandford School and also with the farm. My wife Connie grew up on a farm and she raised chickens and they sold the eggs. We had a rainy Saturday where I couldn't be out working getting the field ready on things. And we thought, well, how can we really involve the Blandford School students with the farm? Well, let's have them do a chicken business and all the aspects with a chicken business. So we brought that up with Mary Jane. Well, she grew up with chickens, so she thought the idea was great. They still have a chicken business.
We set up the program at 6th grade because that's a natural break in the Grand Rapids system. They go to middle school after that. And so we thought that's the way to do it. Well, when these kids went back to wherever they lived, their middle school, they were a scourge as far as those teachers were concerned, because these kids were suddenly questioning everything, into everything, wanting to do this, wanting to do that, way ahead of everybody else in the classroom. And City School was born. And so, we take kind of credit, Connie and Larry, for starting the whole thing. We had an exceptional volunteer guide, and her husband was a fire protection engineer and was not yet retired, and so she was a librarian and a teacher, and she died very suddenly of ovarian cancer, and he began volunteering at the Nature Center. He'd retired by that time, totally lost what to do. He had 3 grown children and grandchildren, and so we were having coffee in the break room. He was working with the maintenance crew, and he'd remodeled several houses, and so he fit right in there perfectly. He just enjoyed it and was out there Monday through Friday every week. And we were talking about I was going to go on this Virgin Island trip and help with the teaching and so on. And he said, gee, that sounds kind of interesting. And he said, well, is there still room? And I said, well, I don't know. I can find out. Well, yeah, we'd make room for one more. And so he talked it over with the kids, and they said, go for it, Dad, because they didn't know what to do with your dad. And so he went, and he just blossomed. I didn't know him at all, really, except just having coffee with him in the break room. And so when we got home, he called me, and he said, I had so much fun on that trip. I'd like to take you to dinner so we can talk about it. Fine and dandy. So we did. Closed the restaurant, talking so much. And one thing kind of led to another. And so we had 16 years. And then he was so interested in places that I'd been. He wanted to know more about them. So we started out, I think we went to Ireland was our first trip. Consequently, 8 trips. And then he wanted to go to Hawaii. And so we did 8 trips there. And always had to have our Upper Peninsula fix every year. So I think we had a good time. I know he had a good time, and I sure did. So it was a good arrangement. Our milk from the cow was poured on. When I decided that 41 years was probably enough and I ought to give somebody else a chance at an expanding part of our community, I sent a letter in to our museum director saying that I would like to retire. It'd be 41 years, July 1st, 1990. And then finally, there came a time when the decree was made that Blandford Nature Center could no longer be funded at all.
They approached us, the public museum, and the idea was they didn't have any money. Not that we did, but they would sell Blandford Nature Center to the Grand Rapids Public Schools for $1. Well, it was really important for Mary Jane and myself that, one, we needed to preserve Blandford Nature Center because, I mean, how many communities have a wonderful environmental center, 5 miles from downtown? It's almost unheard of. So, I mean, that was number one. And number two, I really knew that urban kids didn't have the opportunity to get out into the woods. And so the two just made perfect sense for urban kids and for everybody to have the nature center. So that was really the win-win for the whole idea.
He came out here and spent a whole afternoon with me one day and explained all this to me, and he said, I'm not going to let it close. I'm going to do my best to keep the doors open until we can get reorganized after all this being with the city business, which isn't going to happen ever again. I will just do the best. And he did. So after 3 years, we were able to stand it on our own as a 501c3 nonprofit, an entity unto ourselves. It was very scary, very scary. Now we have our own board, and they are invested in the Nature Center. They think it's great. They help promote it and all that. We have a staff of, I don't know, over a dozen people now, and we're building a new building. It's just mind-boggling to me to see where this little 10 acres has gone. There's the big feldspar in it,
Mary Jane is an inspiration. How she inspires others is through her enthusiasm, her energy. She loves what is around her, and she is not afraid to express it and demonstrate through her actions and her stories about things, and it becomes very contagious.
Sometimes we talk about things that are a fabric of the community, and that applies to people too, because Mary Jane becomes part of the fabric of our community as kids from my age who are now in their 60s to kids like my children who are in elementary school depend on the resources of Blandford and what Mary Jane has brought to this to connect with the natural world.
She has such a passion for this out of doors and for educating people about what's in their natural surroundings. It doesn't matter what her audience is, whether it's senior citizens or young people. When she's in front of them, she mesmerizes them.
She models for us what it means to be in touch with nature, to recognize that we are part of nature, nature is part of us, and that we need to respect it rather than abuse it. We need to make sure that it's preserved for future generations rather than simply taking its resources now and not worrying about the future. There's a spirit about Mary Jane Dockeray that is well, it's sort of incarnated, I would say, in this place that we're in here at Blandford, and it's a spirit of curiosity, of continuous lifelong learning, and of love for nature.
When I think of people throughout my life who have helped me, I quite often think of myself as a turtle on a fence post. And that if you ever see a turtle resting on a fence post, you can be certain that turtle will not get up there by itself. So you think of the people who throughout your life have really helped to elevate you and encourage you to do things. Mary Jane has probably been my top 3. And so that's probably been one of the greatest impacts that I've had, is that throughout my years of doing the work that I have done, Mary Jane has helped me to get to taller fence posts.
In the lobby of our existing visitor center is a big scroll that says, "Nothing is accomplished unless somebody cares." I hope I have cared enough and spread that word enough, and how to identify the common things that they might run across when they're mowing. There's quite a big patch. I'm just doing what comes naturally, but if it works, so be it.